Yep.
All right,
okay.
You can start
to
present.
Everybody, we're going to start now. This is the last POI talk for the year, and POI was actually born in 2020. So even though we've probably all had a bad year, different levels, I know for everyone in the POI team and us especially, we're really excited that this was brought to life in 2020, and that you're all here, new faces, old faces. I think Bruno's talk is the perfect way to end the POI year, because for me, 2021 is actually the start of the new decade, being the 1 year. So hopefully we're going to find out about new economic models and ways that we can all, think about moving forward and creating different realities in the world at large. So over to Bruno, we'll have questions, and also today we're going to have a break. So we're going to test out the idea of having a break, and you'll have 10 minutes to do drinks, toilets, and then we'll get straight back to it. Just, in case you're getting restless. So Here is Bruno and the economics of tomorrow. Give him a warm welcome.
Okay, so hello everyone. I'm really glad to see that many people coming. So is it okay in the back? Can you hear me? Great. So first, I would like to give a big thank you to Moose, who initiated POI. It is his vision, and it is becoming something great, I think, and growing again and again. So without him, we would not be here. And onward to the talk. So economics of tomorrow, towards new business models. And I will start by a very quick introduction of myself to give you a little bit of context. So I'm an engineer with a thirst for knowledge. So I have an engineering background. And then I started to travel a lot. And doing so, I arrived and formulated that motto. So helping society move toward a situation where everyone can live with dignity while respecting our environment. And because I figured out I could not achieve this while remaining in the big corporate world, I broke down everything, came to Vietnam as an entrepreneur. And here is the summary of the talk, and I'm really happy to share those thoughts with you. So we start with the base economic theories of the 18th century, mainly with Karl Marx and Adam Smith, Karl Marx being of the 19th century actually. And I will reach this conclusion that capitalism is destructive as long as value is linked to mass consumption. So I hope after this part, the demonstration will be good enough for you to agree with me. Then onwards to the second part, we will do the applications to today's world. And I will once again demonstrate that we are at a tipping point where the resources are exploited to their limits, and that we need to free our minds to find the right solutions. And then the third part, the process of moving forward, I designed some key concepts for us to actually free our minds. And I will finish with some solutions. And this will be a very open ending. So let's start. Let's start with the basics. So a few key concepts. I won't delve into too many details. So Adam Smith, Karl Marx, which are the two main pillars of this part. Just a small disclaimer, I don't claim myself as a Marxist or a Smithian. Those two theories are very opposed in some ways, but I found them highly coherent while reading them actually. And so this is what I'm going to share with you. So the nature of value. Today we have a tendency to associate value with money. But when we go back in time, we find out that value is initially linked to labor rather than money. So we value something that is on the market on the basis of the labor that was required to bring it on the market. So let me take the example of that coat. So we see that we have three sources for the value. The unit material, which is in this case is called 15 units of labor. the means of production, the needles, the scissors, and stuff like that, which by their depletion are transferring value to the good, and to finish, the worker's labor, which by his energy, his nerves, his muscles, is transferring value as well. So now, on the market, we can see that the bread is worth 3 units. I won't go into the details, and so it's a very convenient way to say, oh, so 1 coat is worth 10 loaves of bread. And then we can see that trade and barter can arise in the first human societies, and every good has an exchange rate based on the value of labor in regards of every other goods. So it's convenient to a certain extent, because you can see it gets complicated quite fast. I took 5 examples here, but imagine in today's world we have so many goods, it would be impossible to cope with. Which is why we came with the concept of pivot commodity. So we say, okay, let's take one commodity that we will use to have an exchange rate with every other. And gold came up as the major one, because it's dense, it's easily transportable, and it doesn't fade over time. But then we came up with another idea. We say, gold is actually heavy, let's keep it in the bank. And we just get a piece of paper, and everybody trusts that with this piece of paper I can go to the bank and retrieve the gold. And then people started to pay themselves with these bills. And they would endorse the bill to someone else, and that was much more convenient in the economy. Then we came up with the currency. Okay, so bills is not, let's make it even more convenient with the currency that we use today. But at first the currency was still linked to gold. It means a bill of $100 just entitled me to go to the bank and retrieve $100 worth of gold. And then the United States decided that, okay, let's make it even more convenient and not link the currency to anything. So from 1971, the currency has a value that we just give to it, but it is not linked to any real commodity. It is not linked to any labor that is required to bring the money to market, which can print trillions of dollars of money. So with that in mind, and you will hopefully understand why I explain everything to you after, let's take a look at the process of capitalism, so what I call the seeds of capitalism. So first, the wonders of stock market. So in the 15th century, we came up with an idea, say, oh, let's bring our finances together and enable massive private corporation to take place. That could not exist before. And basically, you have someone with a great idea, and someone with wealth can tell him, oh, I like your idea. Here is the money to achieve it. And I will just pay off my risk with the profit you make. And so this unlocked the massive, huge private companies to appear, to get into existence. And the first ventures to the Eastern world were made by private companies with some kind of a government, private government, private army and stuff like that. So it's really a new thing in the world. And now what Karl Marx calls the primitive law of accumulation. So it has been observed in the world that when you have a strong political power, it being private or public, like a government, that arrives somewhere where you have a weak party, let's say a bunch of farmers, there is a tendency for the strong political power to expropriate the weak party. So after the expropriation has taken place, we find the strong political power with land to exploit, so he can build factories or leave it as farms, and we find a weak party with the sole possession of labor power. And so that's the perfect match for exploitation. And what is important to notice here is from the perspective of the weak party, let's say the farmers. You were initially in a state where you worked for your own community and rely only on a little extent to commerce. So you're basically you're harvesting your farm, you put the food on the table, and you don't pay, like as a son, you don't pay your father or your mother for the food you're eating. You do it for the sake of community. And after this process of expropriation has happened, you only have your salary. You produce for someone else, and you only have your salary that you can use to sustain yourself. So this is quite an important concept in my mind. So now, how do capitalism hoards profit, accumulates profit? So back on the concept of value transfer through production, we can see that, so that's the basic concept of Karl Marx and Adam Smith. It's like the profit happens only by underpaying the laborer, because you cannot underpay the source material, you cannot underpay the machine, but you can underpay the laborer. So that's how you can accumulate profit. And it has been theorized, it's quite terrific to read actually, but it was really theorized that powerful elites should maintain roughly 10% of unemployment. So you can underpay a worker, and if the worker is protesting, you fire him, and there is 10 people in line waiting to get the job anyway. So you can maintain underpaying for profit. So the limits of the system. So what is the problem in that? And I'm not talking about being a humanitarian. What is the problem in terms of profit? The effect of innovation. So the problem lies in the very heart of innovation. Because what happens? So this is just the same example as we had before. And now you have had a technological breakthrough, and instead of sewing with a needle, you have a sewing machine, so you go much faster. So what happens is that the tool only takes 1 unit of labor instead of 5, and instead of 5 hours of labor, you only need 0.5, 10 units becomes 1 unit, and you pay only 0.5 unit. So the proportion of labor on which you make profit goes down from 1/3 to 1/17 of the production. Therefore, the coat has its value on the market dropping dramatically, and the profit you make dropping even more. And you would say, oh, one might argue that if you have a technological breakthrough, you can produce for less. So therefore, you have an advantage on your competition. But that's not really true, because over time, the technology will spread. And because every company will battle for market share, they will lower and lower their price. So ultimately, the price is always at the equilibrium. And then one might argue again, okay, so I make much less profit per item, but I can produce so many more items. So that's okay, so I make more profit. And that is very true. That is exactly what has happened in the past centuries in our civilization. We produced more to make profit. We constructed a system for people to consume more and produce more, so that's great. The only problem is that the profit per item is going down, and the resource consumption is naturally going up. So we need to produce more for less profit, and we can all see where this is going. So this is why I arrived to this first conclusion, that capitalism is destructive as long as value is linked to mass consumption. So that was the first part. So I hope if you see a flow in the reasoning, please share it. I would be happy to discuss it. And onward to the second part. So I will take the key principles exposed, which are abstract, and apply them in today's society to see to which extent we've arrived yet. So we first talk about the deed of globalization, then what is the essence of digitalization, which is at the heart of today's society, and then we'll talk about the individual in such a scale. So a global order. So today, this principle of capitalism that I described in the first part is all over the world. So we can use our credit card to buy, to order McDonald's and to buy Oreos anywhere, pretty much. With my French bank account, I can go to pretty much any countries and do just that. Then we have to understand that today the factories are spread all over the world. So the supply chains worldwide, and schematically, you have the management in Western countries and you have the factories in developing countries. So what I wanted to show here is to which extent. So now it's global, it's everywhere. And what is at the heart of it is that we have had a breakthrough, a major technological breakthrough in communication. So here I take the example of a car. So maybe the car is, in 100 years, the car has become twice or even 10 times more powerful, more efficient, whatever. The price of communication have dropped down like crazy. It's almost now free to call your relatives at the other side of the world for 5 hours, 10 hours. It's almost free, whereas 50 years ago, only the elites could at great struggle communicate between two continents. So that gave a rise to a new kind of actor which fits in this global economy, and those actors are creating value only on transmitting information. So everything Uber is doing is telling the driver there is someone that wants to go from point A to point B. This is everything Uber is driving. It doesn't have car, doesn't have driver, and so on. So no, I think we agree on the scale we've reached, and I want from this huge scale to go back to the individual perspective into such a globalized world and corporations. So for this talk, I will mainly, for this part, I will mainly rely on Christophe Dejour, which is a French psychoanalyst, and his main thesis is linking psychoanalysis, so what is happening inside one's brain, with the macroeconomic theories. So I say that we are facing a problem of scale, because as individuals, it is nowadays extremely hard to link what we do every day to the purpose of why we do it. For instance, in Western countries, people only work on computers. Basically, we process information on Excel files or ERP or whatever. And it is hard to link this work to the production of the company. Or in a factory in China, it's hard to link soldering the same resistance over and over between the years with the value of thinking differently, to take the example of a very famous smartphone company. And those huge scales induce a management by the number. Because what the CEO sees from his office in the Western world or in New York is dashboards of reportings, of minutes, of consolidations, of numbers coming from all the suppliers. So if you take the case of the famous Apple smartphone, you have thousands of pieces going all over the world. Tim Cook, the CEO, only sees one report. There is no way he can link, he can know what it feels like to wake up in the dystopian environment of the Chinese factories to solve the same resistance every day. This is just not possible. Reversely, the very worker that is compelled to solve every day is not able to project himself to some kind of grand purpose or grand scheme of the company that is hiring him in the first place. And that is, I think, a major problem. So, losing touch with the culture. So you will notice here I used a capital C. A capital C because when I say culture, I mean some kind of grand enterprise at national or international scale that is much beyond ourselves and to which we commit our energy, for which we would ideally wake up every morning and go to work. For instance, the American dream, I think, is an example. For the American dream, you had a full nation of people working extremely hard to make the great United States of America, and what they did is amazing. It's incredible. But today, because of the scale again, we've lost that. We have no future. We fail to express a specific future that will motivate people. Back then, we had a few decades ago, when we were talking about the future, we had flying cars and shoes that lace themselves automatically. Today, we have only, how to say, dystopian futures that we can relate to. And that's why I've chosen this example of this lady that seems quite sad, kind of reflecting on what she's doing and what is the purpose of her endeavor. The process of moving forward, and I'm happy to be challenged. Really, I think it's the whole point. So, for this last part, I want to point out some socio-economic paradigms, the one we are trapped in right now, and a few that we were trapped in the past. Then a redefinition of value, and lastly the solutions. So let's go. So for this part, the main philosopher is Yuval Noah Harari. So that is very famous for his bestseller, Sapiens, that was released a few years ago. So why do we have dogmas? Why do we lock ourselves in beliefs? I say because it's very comfortable. It's much more easy to live one's life believing in a given belief than to constantly question everything. You don't go anywhere by constantly questioning everything, and I don't think we would have built our civilizations doing that. And I think today we praise the market as yesterday we would praise gods. And I took this sentence from...
You worship the number as a god. This is the problem of society.
Exactly.
As soon as you realize that the number is your god, you can re-evaluate that maybe a number shouldn't be the highest power.
So let me enhance what you are saying with with this sentence straight from the book of Karl Marx. So modern society greets gold as its holy grail, as the glittering incarnation of the very principle of its own life. So it's interesting to notice here is like we took to no we don't use gold, we use money, we use cryptocurrency or whatever you want. We took something that we created with our own mind and we use it as the main source of value. So now I want to introduce a key notion in Yuval Harari's work, which is the intersubjectivity. So Harari provides us with this very nice metaphor that before you had a shaman which would cast the sacred wood powder in the sacred flame, and the whole tribe will see the spirit. They would feel the spirit. The spirit would be there. All right. And even though today we have a tendency to mock this kind of behaviors, we have a notary that wields its stamps a piece of paper, and Google is there, Apple is there, any company is there, and we all believe it is there. But what is Google? What is Apple? Is it the logo? Not really. Is it the iPhone? It's not really too. It's something we're really within our minds, and we just all agree Apple is there, it has a moral entity, and that is not questionable, but it could be. And I want to show with a rather provocative statement that those intersubjective spaces change over time. So I took the example of the feminine condition a few decades ago only. So women could not vote. Women were not allowed to have a bank account, and women did not legally exist outside of the marriage. And to show how recent it is, my own grandmother experienced that. Someone that actually took care of me lived in a world where this was the norm. So let's take an even more perhaps provocative example with slavery. Only a decade ago, only a century ago, sorry, it was okay, it was accepted in society to compel a human being to work for free, for your own good. It was okay to go to a foreign country and colonize it and exploit the people. So this was only a decade ago. And who would today advocate for women to be deprived from the right of voting? Who would advocate to exploit a given population? This sounds, I think, really absurd to us. And so let's take a leap in time and imagine we are 100 years ago, 100 years in the future, and we would describe our time. We could describe it in this way, like someone say, oh, 100 years ago, look at how they will use valuable resources for to wasteful purposes, how they will destroy everything for the sake of the few, while the many were left in misery. So, saying so, I want to show to everybody how absurd is our current intersubjective space right now, and how we could be able to get out of it, because when we look back in time, the previous intersubjective spaces seems just as silly to us. So I think that the next step, now that we are out of our paradigm, let's try to redefine the value. So take one more example with the financial markets and the story of the Allegheny Mountain. So this was a secret project that cost 300 million euros. And the project consisted in drilling through Boston and New York for the two marketplaces to have a latency down 1.3 milliseconds. So that sounds a bit weird, but actually it makes great economic sense. The return on investment was huge, and it's brilliantly described in some papers. Because in our paradigm, it makes sense to spend 300 million to drill through mountains for this purpose. But actually, if we take a step back, we say these resources, so not even talking about the money, but the material, the nerves, the machine, everything could have been used, all this value could have been used to build schools, try and end world hunger, research, purposes or whatever. So I tried to frame this problem in an abstract manner by saying, like, structuring our system around a purely intersubjective space produces economic models that are absurd from an objective perspective. So from this statement, I think we can move forward eventually. And I think the key to moving forward is to assess the value of ecosystem. Because today what happens? We take the resources, we produce our goods, we consume our goods, and we leave it to waste. And the value we take from the ecosystem, when we destroy a forest, when we ruin the ocean or whatever, and the value we destroy by leaving plastic everywhere or stuff like that, is not accounted for. So I did not make extensive research, but I want to point out the Millennial Ecosystem Assessment, which is a program by the United Nations that does just that. So now imagine we enter a new paradigm, we enter a new intersubjective space where we account for the value we destroy in ecosystem by production and by waste. If we would do that, the price of a mobile phone, I took this example, but the price of anything would go dramatically up, will soar. If we consider the destruction of the forest, pollution of land and water, the CO2 from the supply chains and stuff like that, even though it is optimized, it's still the price will be extremely high. So if we would pay the right price, our individual comfort will go down because we could afford less commodities. We could afford maybe one phone every 10 years, and we could not buy so many clothes because they would cost more. But please challenge me on that statement as well. But we would enjoy a preserved environment because we will consider the value of it. We will consider fresh air. We could go outside and breathe correctly. We would consider nature, preserve nature. We consider beaches without plastic everywhere. It would be valuable, and we could account for it. So yeah, that's why I wrote, if the collective notion of value shifts, so too will the owner of the current world wealth. So from an elite few that have to a broader public. So I think that is one key of the problem. So now it's almost done. What I will do in this last part is just enumerate some solutions, and I hope this will lead us to have a constructive discussion about the solution. So the example of charities. So this is a world I've been studying recently, and what I've witnessed is that charities are fueled by donations from unsustainable economic models. So let me explain myself. A standard model will be accounted for all this value. This is a valorization in the stock market, for instance. But if we will retrieve the destruction and pollution and stuff, actually it doesn't create that much value. Maybe it's even negative, I don't know. And what happens today is that a fraction of this value is transferred to charity as donation, and that is how the charities operate. But if we think about it, the charities actually produce sustainable or sensible value by protecting the ecosystems, educating the children, and so on, cleaning the environment. So this is, I think there is something here. This is not a full statement, but I think we could fuel a business model out of a charity that will not rely on donations, because if we account for the value created by the charity in preserving the environment and so on and so on. Next example, enterprise with a mission. So this is a term I'm hearing more and more recently, and I think it's worth knowing what it is. Basically, an enterprise with a mission is an enterprise whose status, it's engraved in the status legally, that the enterprise cannot be used for something else than the mission it is committed to. And a brilliant example of this is Ecosia. So for those who do not know, Ecosia is a search engine whose service is similar to Google, but the profit is used to plant trees. And in its status, you cannot have that profit given to stakeholders. This profit has to be used to plant trees. And even if the current founder goes away, is out of the picture, the company will continue doing that because it is legally engraved. So now the circular economy. So I won't go to too much extent on this because it's very well known already. But I think I'd like us to consider circular economy under the light of all the principles I've exposed in the talk. Because a big something that is hindering the establishment of circular economy is the loss of value creation in regard of a linear economy. So where you take, you consume, and you throw, and then you take less, so you use less resource, and then you make less value, but which is an absurdity of the current paradigm that we should not continue having. So this one is a bit more personal, which is called economy as a service. I think that today we have a shift that actually comes from the software industry, so which is my industry. But we have what we call the software as a service. And it is this notion of, I want to use the software, I don't want to deal with hosting the software and developing the software. That's not what I want to do. I want the service. And actually, when we take the car, we don't want to have the car. We want to go from point A to point B. When we wash our clothes, we do not want to own a washing machine. We want clean clothes. So this idea, I think there is something to do with that, because we could create value by facilitating sustainable behavior dramatically through new technology. So let me explain. For instance, recently I wanted to repair my shoes, and I did not find here a suitable, I did not find un cordonnier, comme on dit? Cobbler, okay. And so it was requiring a lot of effort for me to live in a sustainable way. This is why we need to shift and shape the economy for us to enable people to live in a sustainable way easily. And that is a lot of value to create. This is one example. And then, because of the notions of liberal market and the free market, if we push toward this state, everything will adapt, and first innovation will push toward a repair economy, because it makes more sense, because we save value in the ecosystem if we account for it. It will be much cheaper to repair because we will have the supply chains adapted for it. And everybody could benefit from that. And I want to conclude by saying that the political landscape is changing toward that direction. And for instance, Europe just issued a few weeks ago a right to repair legislation, which pushes and kind of compels the industries to produce repairable stuff, with even a label of repairability, if that exists in English. So, onward to my conclusion. So, I think that we need better policies, not better technologies. We have had major technological breakthrough already, and it did not solve the core problem that we are facing now. And I would like to conclude by quoting Thomas Hobbes, that introduced the notion of state of nature. So in Thomas Hobbes' work, humanity started in the state of nature, where our selfishness was aggressively aimed at the other, and everybody was battling to kill the others and take their possessions. And at some point, we found out that it would be more productive to associate ourselves into cities and political structures, that our selfishness will be much more comforted in that way. And I think that we are on the verge of somewhat similar transition, where everybody now is kind of selfishly consuming, myself the first, and that somehow we say, well, maybe if we associate together and find a new economic model where we are more likely to survive, our own selfishness will be fulfilled somehow. So I think solutions are right in front of our eyes if we get out of the current intersubjective space. And I think that the change is happening, whether or not we agree with it. So I hope you enjoyed, and this is the end.